She combined these qualities with warmth, humor, and an unerring ability always to see the best in people.
The royal procession was only minutes away from entering Westminster Abbey when King Charles made the decision no one around him had expected. Camilla had arrived prepared to assume a powerful new ceremonial role, one designed to place her at the center of Commonwealth Day. But before the doors opened, the monarch refused to authorize it. One quiet sentence changed the procession, stunned the palace, and left the Queen facing the most painful rejection of her royal life. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles studied the final order of service, the printed schedule governing the ceremony, in silence. The Commonwealth Day service, an annual ceremony celebrating nations linked through the Commonwealth, had drawn royals, diplomats, clergy, and guests to Westminster Abbey that solemn morning. Camilla was meant to serve as principal royal host, a newly created position, allowing her to lead the royal party and deliver the closing pledge, normally spoken by the sovereign. The king closed the booklet and set it down. He did not argue or soften the blow. He told officials to restore the traditional procession and confirmed that he would deliver the pledge himself. The role was never merely ceremonial. It would have shown the public that the Queen could act not only beside him, but visibly in his place. Camilla stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. She had rehearsed and prepared for weeks. When Charles repeated the order without raising his voice, disbelief hardened into humiliation. She asked whether he understood what the reversal would look like once the doors opened and the household realized she had been removed at the last moment. Silence answered first. Senior aides lowered their eyes as the Queen pulled off one glove and crushed it in her hand. No explanation could make this feel harmless. Charles had chosen the final minutes before the procession, and everyone knew the timing made the refusal personal. William entered moments later and absorbed the news without surprise. The prince did not question the decision or seek clarification. His calm told Camilla more than words could have done. She looked from the future king to Charles and understood that this boundary may have been discussed before she arrived. Then the abbey bells began to sound. Camilla asked whether this was punishment for what happened during the private rehearsal. The king refused to answer. She walked toward the abbey, knowing her role had been taken from her. But the deeper wound came from realizing that Charles and William may already have decided how far her authority would ever be allowed to reach. Behind the altered procession stood three people confronting three very different fears. Camilla feared that decades of sacrifice had still not earned her permanent acceptance. Charles feared that protecting his wife could weaken the crown he had waited a lifetime to inherit. William feared that temporary concessions were quietly becoming irreversible powers. As the service began, each of them understood that the argument was no longer about one speech. It was about who would define the monarchy's future. Camilla had spent weeks preparing for that moment. She had studied the Commonwealth Pledge, met organizers, and rehearsed every pause until the words felt like her own. The pledge was the closing promise delivered on behalf of the sovereign, a role that carried symbolic authority far beyond a ceremonial reading. To her, the responsibility meant trust. It meant the institution no longer saw her as someone standing beside the king, but as someone capable of carrying part of his burden. Charles knew exactly why the role mattered to her. He had defended his wife through years of anger, suspicion, and public rejection. He had watched her absorb criticism without always answering it. Yet the monarch also understood that affection could not erase constitutional boundaries. His authority, the influence of a consort, and William's place as the future king had to remain separate, or one temporary decision could reshape the next reign. Then the pledge began. Camilla sat beside Charles while he spoke the words she had prepared to deliver. Her hands remained still, but she never looked toward him. The Queen heard every line, every pause, every phrase she had practiced. Now returned to the man who had taken the role away. Her silence was not calm. It was restraint. William saw the wound clearly. The prince watched her controlled expression and felt no triumph. He had wanted the boundary restored, but he also understood the cost. Every limit placed on Camilla risked becoming another argument between father and son, another private fracture hidden behind public duty. Catherine noticed something even more dangerous. The princess saw Charles glance toward his wife after the address, searching for some sign of forgiveness. Camilla continued facing forward. That refusal to meet his eyes carried more force than any confrontation. William already knew why the tension had reached this point. He had discovered that the Queen's new role had moved through planning meetings without formal approval from every senior royal household. What had been introduced as a temporary arrangement was slowly being treated as settled precedent, and one moment had convinced him to act. During the rehearsal, Camilla had not only expanded her own position, she had attempted to move Catherine's place in the procession as well. To understand why Charles stopped the ceremony at the final moment, the story had to return to the exchange that turned a private concern into a direct challenge to the future crown. 7 days before Commonwealth Day, the palace gathered for what should have been a routine rehearsal. The procession was marked, the speeches were printed, and every movement had been timed to the second. Then Camilla requested one final adjustment. It appeared minor on paper, but William immediately understood its significance. Catherine's position would be moved back, the Queen's authority would expand, and a temporary arrangement would begin to look like a permanent rewriting of royal rank. Camilla spoke to the ceremonial secretary with complete confidence. The official responsible for organizing the order of the event was told to place Catherine behind several extended members of the royal household. The Queen argued that only the principal royal host, the person assigned to lead the royal party during the ceremony, should stand directly behind Charles. On paper, it was one alteration. In practice, it pushed the future Queen further from the center, while drawing Camilla closer to the sovereign's authority. Then came the second change. The printed program would describe Camilla as acting on behalf of the sovereign. That phrase carried far more weight than the temporary role originally proposed. It suggested that the king had transferred part of his ceremonial authority to her, not merely asked his wife to assist him for one important service. William moved before anyone else could answer. The prince turned the program around and asked who had approved the wording. His voice remained controlled, but the anger underneath it was unmistakable. Camilla replied that the arrangement reflected practical reality. She reminded him that she was the king's wife, and insisted the monarchy could not remain frozen whenever Charles needed support. Catherine stepped in, before the exchange became more bitter. The princess said she would stand wherever the monarch requested, but she would not allow her position to become a weapon in a family struggle. Her calm did not ease William's frustration, it deepened it. He believed her instinct to avoid conflict was being used to weaken the place she would one day hold. Charles entered before either side realized he was listening. The king heard Camilla tell William that the monarchy could not be organized around what may happen in another reign. The words landed heavily. They did not sound like a practical defense. They sounded like a dismissal of his son's future. Charles walked to the table, lifted the pen beside the revised program, and placed it down without signing. He said the wording would be reviewed personally, then ended the rehearsal early. Later that evening, William received a private summons. He arrived expecting an argument. Instead, his father asked one question. How far did he believe Camilla intended to take the role? The rehearsal had exposed the danger, but the final rupture would come at Westminster Abbey, where Charles and Camilla would face each other without ceremony, protecting either of them. Inside a private chamber near the Abbey entrance, the ceremony disappeared and the marriage took its place. Camilla stood opposite Charles with no audience, beyond 2 aides waiting outside the closed door. She had rehearsed the pledge, accepted congratulations, and arrived believing the new role had been secured. Now the king was asking her to step back without explanation. What followed was not a constitutional discussion. It was a deeply personal confrontation between two people who believed the other had betrayed them. Charles asked the attendants to leave, then closed the door himself. The king remained beside a small table, while Camilla stood near the chair holding her gloves and printed program. Neither moved toward the other. The silence between them carried everything they had avoided saying during the rehearsal. The monarch spoke first. Camilla could still accompany him, support the service, and retain her existing place beside the sovereign. But she would not deliver the pledge in his name. She would not be described as acting on behalf of the crown, and the event would not be used to create a permanent hierarchy around a temporary role. Camilla stared at him in disbelief. "You let me prepare for nothing," she said. The Queen reminded Charles that he had watched the planning continue for weeks. He had seen her study the words, attend meetings, and accept the responsibility. Yet he had waited until minutes before the service to remove it, knowing the entire household would understand what had happened. Charles did not deny the cruelty of the timing. He said he had expected the position to remain narrow and ceremonial. But when Camilla altered Catherine's place and expanded the wording in the program, she turned a practical accommodation into a test of authority. What began as support had started to look like succession by stealth. Then the accusation shifted. Camilla asked whether William had demanded the reversal. Charles refused to place the decision on his son, but admitted that the prince had brought him the revised program and asked whether he had personally approved it. That question had forced the king to confront what everyone else had been too cautious to say. The queen insisted she had been protecting the monarchy during a period of uncertainty. Charles answered with the sentence that wounded her most. The crown could not be protected by making the next reign feel threatened by the current one. Camilla reached for her gloves, then stopped. She asked whether he still trusted her with any independent royal authority. The king hesitated. That pause became the answer. The doors opened, and the procession began. But behind the restored order lay a harsher reality. Charles had not merely cancelled one role. He had begun reviewing the entire structure of Camilla's influence. Camilla believed William had forced the king's hand, but the truth was more complicated. Charles had not acted because of one demand or one wounded complaint. Over several private meetings, he had listened to constitutional advisors, senior courtiers, and members of his own family. Yet the final choice remained his alone. Behind the ceremony stood an uncomfortable discovery. The Queen's temporary responsibilities had grown faster than anyone had intended, and no one had been willing to stop them. Charles ordered a confidential review immediately after the rehearsal. The principal royal host proposal, a temporary arrangement allowing one senior royal to lead selected ceremonial duties, had never been fully defined. Advisors warned that the title could easily be read as delegated sovereign authority, meaning power exercised in the monarch's name. Once that language entered official programs, it could begin creating precedent. Anne understood the danger at once. The Princess Royal reminded her brother that royal wording never remained harmless for long. Ceremonial phrases were repeated, copied, and eventually treated as tradition. If a consort was formally described as acting for the sovereign, removing that wording later could look like punishment rather than correction. Charles resented the coldness of the argument. The king told Anne that officials spoke about Camilla as though she were a problem to be managed. He had watched his wife endure years of hostility, judgment, and doubt. She deserved dignity, he insisted, not another carefully arranged rejection from the institution she had spent years serving. Anne refused to soften the warning. She told Charles that compassion could not come at William's expense. The princess said kindness became dangerous when it prevented a monarch from drawing necessary boundaries. Protecting Camilla's feelings could not mean weakening the future king before his reign had even begun. Then the sealed briefing arrived. Charles opened the document expecting recommendations about Commonwealth Day. Instead, he found plans listing Camilla as independently presiding at 2 further national ceremonies. Neither engagement had reached him for final personal approval. The Queen's temporary role was already spreading beyond the event that had justified it. That discovery settled the matter. The monarch chose not to cancel the position quietly in advance. He waited until the final program was placed before him at Westminster Abbey, then refused it directly. He wanted the decision recorded as his own, leaving no room for officials to soften, delay, or reinterpret it later. But the secrecy did not survive the journey home. An aide left a briefing folder visible inside the royal car. Camilla noticed the heading, Scope of Independent Duties. In that instant, she understood everything. The humiliation at the Abbey had not been the end. Charles was examining the entire reach of her authority, and her first response would send shock through the palace. Camilla did not shout when she returned to the palace. She did something far more unsettling. The Queen entered her private sitting room, removed the Commonwealth brooch from her coat, and placed it inside a closed drawer. Then she canceled her next 2 engagements. No public explanation was given, but within minutes, Charles understood the message. She would not continue performing the supportive role expected of her, while her independent authority was being questioned behind closed doors. Camilla withdrew first from a reception for Commonwealth youth representatives, then from a scheduled meeting with diplomatic spouses. Both engagements had been designed to show royal unity after the service. Instead, officials were forced to rearrange them with almost no warning, and every hurried change deepened the sense that the dispute had escaped the private rooms where it began. The palace divided quietly. Camilla's household insisted she was emotionally exhausted and needed privacy after the humiliation at Westminster Abbey. The king's office saw something more deliberate. To them, the cancellations were a protest, one powerful enough to turn a wounded marriage into an institutional crisis. A loyal aide suggested issuing a brief statement saying the queen was unwell. Camilla refused immediately. She would not hide behind illness, she said, simply to make Charles' decision easier for everyone else to explain. If the palace wanted silence, it would have to accept the questions that came with it. Charles felt those questions at the youth reception. The king paused beside the empty chair reserved for his wife and rested his hand against its back for one brief moment. Anger rose first. Camilla had left him to absorb the consequences alone. Then guilt followed. He knew the boundary had been necessary, but he could no longer pretend the manner of his refusal had been fair. The message arrived before the reception ended. Camilla had written to him by hand. The queen said she would not resume her full schedule until the review defined what she truly was within the monarchy: a partner, a consort, or merely a ceremonial companion, called forward when useful and pushed aside when inconvenient. Charles folded the letter carefully. The monarch dismissed his private secretary and refused to answer through staff. He would go to Camilla's rooms that evening without advisors, prepared to speak as her husband rather than issue another royal instruction. But before he could leave, William requested a private conversation. The prince did not urge his father to remain firm. Instead, he warned that allowing the marriage to collapse in public would damage the crown more deeply than the disputed role ever could. William had fought to protect the future monarchy, but now he urged Charles to protect the woman beside him, opening the door to the most honest conversation father and son had shared in years. For once, there were no secretaries, no constitutional papers, and no rehearsed royal phrases. Charles and William stood alone in the king's private study, facing the consequences of a decision they both believed had been necessary. The prince had opposed Camilla's expanded authority from the beginning, yet now he was the one telling his father to go to her. In that unguarded moment, the future king revealed that defending the crown did not require destroying the family holding it together. William closed the study door and placed the disputed Commonwealth program on the desk. He told Charles that the ceremonial boundary had been right. Camilla could not be allowed to act in the sovereign's name or push Catherine further from the place awaiting her. But the prince also said the decision had been handled with unnecessary cruelty. The future king drew a line between authority and respect. Opposing the queen's expanded role did not erase her years of service, nor did it deny her place beside Charles. The monarchy had to limit power without humiliating the person losing it. Otherwise, duty would become an excuse for punishment. Charles finally admitted what pride had hidden. The king had delayed because he lacked the courage to confront his wife earlier. He had watched the preparations continue while hoping the dispute would somehow disappear. Each passing day made the truth harder to deliver, until he was forced to choose in the final minutes before the service. William did not condemn him. He spoke more quietly. Silence had not prevented pain, the prince explained. It had concentrated it. Camilla had been allowed to believe she had earned the position, only to lose it where the household could witness her shock. A private warning might have caused anger. The public reversal created humiliation. Charles then asked the question beneath every other argument. Could his son ever trust her again? William paused. Trust would depend on whether Camilla accepted that Catherine's future standing could not be negotiated through programs, processions, or temporary arrangements. The Princess of Wales held a place tied to the next reign, and no present role could be built by diminishing it. Then the prince offered the compromise no advisor had found. Camilla could retain a prominent public position, leading selected charitable work and diplomatic engagements. But she could never formally act on behalf of the sovereign, meaning she could not exercise ceremonial authority in the monarch's name, or alter the standing of William and Catherine. Charles lifted the program and Camilla's handwritten letter. The king crossed the corridor alone and stopped outside her rooms. She opened the door but did not step aside. Only when he said he had come as her husband, not as the sovereign, did she let him enter. The constitutional battle had finally produced a human answer, but their private settlement would mean nothing unless Camilla could face the public storm already breaking beyond the palace gates. By sunrise, the private rejection had become a national spectacle. One photograph dominated front pages and television screens, Charles delivering the Commonwealth pledge, while Camilla sat beside him, staring forward with her hands locked tightly together. The image required no leaked document and no palace explanation. It appeared to show a queen publicly excluded by her own husband. Yet as broadcasters reconstructed the altered ceremony, another interpretation emerged, one that transformed the moment from marital humiliation into a defining boundary for the monarchy. Newsrooms moved quickly. Broadcasters confirmed that the published ceremonial program had been changed shortly before the service. The closing pledge, first assigned to Camilla, had been returned to the king. That detail mattered because the pledge represented more than a speech. It carried the authority of the sovereign, and whoever delivered it appeared to speak for the crown itself. The palace tried to contain the damage with a careful statement. Officials described the change as a decision made to preserve constitutional clarity, meaning the clear separation between the monarch's authority and the duties of other royals. The statement said nothing about the rehearsal, the expanded role, or the Queen's cancelled engagements. Its silence only deepened public suspicion. Camilla faced the story at breakfast. She opened a newspaper and saw the headline, "The King Said No." Beneath it was the image of her seated while Charles delivered the words she had prepared. The Queen folded the paper once and pushed it away. She did not defend herself. She did not accuse him. Her silence made the humiliation feel even sharper. Charles watched the reaction shift in a direction he had not expected. The king had prepared for criticism of his wife, but many commentators described her as blindsided and publicly embarrassed. He began to understand that even a necessary decision could appear merciless when delivered without warning. Outside Buckingham Palace, the argument became impossible to ignore. Tourists and royal supporters gathered near the gates. Some praised Charles for protecting the succession. Others demanded dignity for Camilla. The divided crowd reflected the battle inside the family. Duty on one side, loyalty on the other. Then the Queen made her choice. Rather than remain hidden, Camilla attended a scheduled literacy reception without the disputed ceremonial insignia. When one guest asked how she was feeling, she answered carefully, "Service matters more than position." The remark came from a direct public exchange and signaled acceptance without pretending the wound had disappeared. That evening, Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine prepared to meet in private. The public had witnessed the rejection, but only those four people could decide whether it ended in lasting resentment or a new royal understanding. The final meeting did not restore Camilla's new role, nor did it erase the humiliation she had endured. Instead, it forced the royal family to speak with a clarity they had avoided for too long. Charles entered determined to defend his decision. William arrived prepared to protect the succession. Catherine came hoping to prevent another permanent division. Camilla carried the deepest wound of all. By the time they left, the crown had drawn its boundary, and the family had chosen whether to survive it. Charles spoke first and ended the uncertainty. The position of principal royal host, a proposed ceremonial role allowing one royal to lead duties normally connected to the sovereign, would be abolished. No consort would deliver pledges reserved for the monarch, formally act in the sovereign's name, or independently change the ceremonial standing of the direct heirs. The king made the boundary unmistakable because any temporary exception could become a precedent and weaken the order supporting William's future reign. Camilla listened without interrupting. The Queen would continue leading literacy initiatives, supporting survivors of domestic abuse, hosting selected diplomatic receptions, and accompanying Charles at major national events. Her years of service would not be erased. Yet her constitutional reach, the formal limit of authority attached to her royal position, would remain clearly separated from the powers of the monarch and the place of the next king. Catherine addressed Camilla directly. The princess said she had never wanted the disputed role to become a contest between them. She understood the pain of being discussed as a symbol instead of a person, and she asked that neither woman ever again be used to strengthen rival factions inside the family. Camilla met her honesty with an admission of her own. The Queen confessed that the position had come to matter too much. It seemed capable of settling years of doubt about whether she truly belonged. Camilla acknowledged that ambition and insecurity had become impossible to separate, and Catherine understood that the struggle had been driven not only by power, but by an old fear of rejection. Charles then offered the apology everyone had been waiting to hear. The king did not withdraw his decision. He said refusing the role had been necessary, but waiting until Westminster Abbey had been wrong. He apologized for allowing his wife to prepare for an honor he had already begun questioning. Camilla accepted. She agreed to resume her schedule, not because she recovered the authority she wanted, but because she finally knew where she stood. William's future was protected, Catherine's position was affirmed, her own service was respected, and Charles had finally separated his duty as monarch from his devotion as a husband. Camilla entered Westminster Abbey expecting new royal power and left confronting its limits. By accepting those limits, she stopped one painful refusal from becoming a permanent war. The decision wounded a marriage and divided the public, yet it gave the monarchy clarity, restraint, and a future no longer threatened by silent competition. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.